Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Circular Carbon Economy. We're grateful to Adam Szymanski from King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, CAPSARC, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website, www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We kindly request that you do not send your questions by email. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Adam Szymanski, President, King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, and former head of the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Well, today we're going to talk about the circular economy and the circular carbon economy. And all of us are learning new things about virtual webinars and seminars, we do have Khalid Al-Balif from the Energy Ministry here in Saudi Arabia standing by, and Dave and Rebecca, Khalid is trying to figure out where the link is for him to join the panel, and if you could resend that to Khalid now, that would be a good idea. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is introduce William McDonough, who you can see on your screen right now along with me. He was recently named one of Fortune magazine's 50 great leaders. Bill counsels corporate and government executives through his consultancy, McDonough Innovation. He's an architect and the author of Cradle to Cradle, which is a primer on the circular economy. It was written nearly 20 years ago. Bill is on the faculty of Stanford University, and he has been the chair of the Meta Council for the Circular Economy of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Bill, will turn it over for you to go through your presentation, and then I'll go through mine, and we will also have a presentation from Khalid Al-Balif, and then we'll open up for questions. So, Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Let me get my presentation on the screen, and we can begin. So today's discussion is about the circular carbon economy. This idea, which is relatively new and coming from Saudi Arabia and others that are working on circular economy, but also how to integrate carbon, is a really critical one. And I think it's exciting to see it coming on the scene for obvious reasons. One is that carbon has been demonized as an element when people say, oh, carbon is the problem or things like that. Carbon is actually quite important, and we can get to that in a minute and set the stage for this discussion. But I like to start with something to sort of get us free from our regular routines. And like Carl Sagan, the astronomer, said, if you want to bake a pie from scratch, first you must create the universe. So let's just go back out and look at this planet from space and realize that millions and millions of years ago, billions of years ago, it looked like Venus. And so here we have energy coming from the sun, we have minerals and water on this rock in space, and then over time we get biology and life, and it forms a crust of humus and also blue carbon in the oceans. And all of a sudden we have life. So the energy is coming from the sun, the materials are here, and life is forming. And we are humans. And it's interesting because that word comes from the word humus in Latin, as does the word humility, which means to be grounded. So I think we can go into this conversation being grounded with humility. One thing that I want to start with, since we're dealing with economics, is to look at that line at the end there, value. And when we look even at the history and Western philosophy of value and values, we see Plato talking about values, what's the right, the wrong, the good, the bad, the ethical, unethical. And then Aristotle, his student, talking about value and, you know, what is less, what is more. So a number. So the one is truth in beauty, really, and humanity. The other is truth in number and science. So we can work our way through these, but what I find today, if it's all right with everyone, I'd love to take a quick look and realize if we start only with number and value, we will get to benchmarking. You know, we have to reduce this, we have to do that. We're benchmarking. Whereas if we start today with what are our values, what's the right thing to do? What does quality look like? And then work through a set of principles, some visions, you'll see some goals, strategies, tactics, metrics, and get to the value. We will have to get to the numbers. But let's start with the right thing to do. Now, Peter Drucker, the management consultant, would say manager's job is to be efficient and do something the right way. But it's the executive's job to be effective and do the right thing. Then give it to the managers to do the right way. So we'll start today by looking at what is the right thing to do. This is executive moment to make some decisions. Now, in my personal history, I thought this might be amusing, perhaps, but hopefully useful. When I started at Dartmouth in 1969, I decided if I was ever going to be an architect, I wanted to make buildings like trees. I'm young, I'm excited, and you know, it became more and more of a commitment to me. And I realized this idea of zero emissions, when people would use trees to illustrate it, I would think, wait, trees emit oxygen. They do a lot of different things. And so what if we could design buildings that could do all the things in this list? Perhaps it's hard to self-replicate. Nature has us on that one. But when I won a competition in 1989 in Poland, I said, what if we plant 10 square miles of trees to go with the building to cover its energy costs for building it and operating it? And the Wall Street Journal thought this was so interesting, they put it on the front page. And it was actually a very interesting article because they were curious about it. No one was thinking about these things then. It was 3 years before the Earth Summit. So what about this idea of planting trees to go with things? This is from a few months ago. President Trump says the United States is going to join the 1 trillion trees initiative. Isn't that something? So this isn't that crazy an idea. Now, in 1995, I designed a building at Oberlin College that produces 130% of the electricity it needs from renewable sources and purifies its own water. And so we call this an energy positive building or carbon positive building. We're designing YouTube's headquarters now in Silicon Valley. And this is a giant undulating roof of the ancient grasses of this place, collecting water, storm water, producing oxygen, and so on. For Ford River Rouge, we did the world's largest green roof. This is a 5-hectare green roof. And it was done using camouflage systems from the Cold War in East Germany, very lightweight plants that absorb water. But this whole system saved Ford $35 million in CapEx over conventional engineering. $35 million savings in day one. This is cheaper than free because we didn't need chemical plants and pipes. And that really does matter because at Ford, with the Ford Taurus at a 4% margin coming out of Chicago, that would be the equivalent of walking into the boardroom and offering them an order for $900 million worth of cars. So these things do turn into money, and we can calculate it. It may come from an odd angle. I was asked to help with the Mars space station at NASA, and I asked if I could work with the space station design teams and do a building on Earth. So we did. It's down on the lower right. If you see the upper left there is where they did the space shuttle. Those are the wind tunnels. So we adopted that aesthetic here and built a building at the same price as a normal federal office building ahead of schedule. But by working with the rocket scientists, we were able to design a building that has potential to make 40% more energy than it requires and give it to its neighbors. The materials are all designed to go back to industry. Here's a building for Herman Miller, the furniture company. This, you see the public area between the office and the factory on the right. That is the boulevard. They all mix up together. They have daylight, fresh air. It was only 5% more cost than a metal shed. The production went from 250 million to 350 million because people felt like they were working in California all of a sudden instead of Western Michigan. And at $100 million more production a year with 250 people, take out the materials at 60 million, the building was producing $40 million profit more every year with the same people. Since the building cost $15 million, Herman Miller says that the building pays for itself in CapEx every 4 months. That's different than energy savings or something. That's CapEx. Now, at the time, we were writing Cradle to Cradle about systems where waste is food for another thing, just like nature, where energy can be used in ways that are clean, and we can celebrate diversity, these things. When I asked Herman Miller if we could work on the furniture, they said, we don't hire architects to design chairs. And I said, that's fine. I don't want to do a chair. I want to do all your furniture. So we ended up doing all the furniture, Cradle to Cradle certified. And so this is the Mira chair, the first one. Also the Aeron, you've all probably sat in one, is a Cradle to Cradle chair. These chairs are designed to come apart and all the parts are marked and they can go back to industry in the future. Products as a service, we call it. This was all done with wind power as part of the exercise. Here, a solar-powered carpets. This is for Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. Number 5 in the industry when we retooled it to do Cradle to Cradle products. These materials are all designed for safety and health, and essentially we're storing our raw materials on our customers' floors. They're designed for recycling. Shaw is now the largest carpet company in the world. Mr. Buffett was happy with his investment, and he understands that it's better for us to reuse 1.4 billion pounds of carpet again, rather than burn it or throw it in landfills. So this system is now a scientifically peer-reviewed, rigorous system for certification of materials. But the reason I'm showing it here today is to give you a sense of what is Cradle to Cradle design. That's what it is. And it's designing things that can go back to nature or back to industry and separate them. Be careful. So things that like clothing or shampoo and things like that can go back to soil. We'll go back to soil. We'll go back to water when you wash it off and things like that. Those things can be designed to be safe in the biosphere. On the technical side, we have minerals, polymers, things that we've been using ever since we started banging on metal 5,000 years ago. And these we see as products as a service. You want the service of the metal in its form as a shovel or a sword or a plowshare or a TV or whatever. And that's the idea, that you want the service of it, not necessarily ownership of, in the case of the television, 4,360 different chemicals. So the Cradle to Cradle certification looks at material health first. So let's make sure we have goods instead of bads. So we have goods and services, not bad. So safe, healthy materials for things. Secondly is circular economy, that we want to design things to come back. And it's just not end of life, which may mean a landfill or an incinerator. We call it end of use. And if you design for end of use, then you're designing for next use. If you design for next use, welcome to the circular economy. If we design carbon for next use, welcome to the circular carbon economy. When we look at powering all these systems, we want clean energy and restorative carbon balances, which we'll talk about in a moment. We want water stewardship, so people deserve fresh water, and social fairness. So that's Cradle to Cradle. And that's the 5 on the top conditions. And just by the way, they're all foundational to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So when enterprises and organizations want to look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, it's quite wise to start with these 5 because it touches all of them. I was the chair of the China-US Center for Sustainable Development, the US chair. My co-chair was Madame Deng Nan, Deng Xiaoping's daughter. She ran the Earth Summit for China. And this is a paper I'm delivering to the Chinese entitled Cradle to Cradle, the Circular Economy and the Search for Ecological Civilization. And it's been amazing. The Chinese have had their 12th and 13th five-year plans are entitled the circular economy. The first was promote the circular economy, and the second is implement the circular economy. That one's just ending now, and they're moving on to ecological civilization. That's policy strategy. We published the book as The Design of the Circular Economy in China and at Tsinghua University. And if we look at the history of the circular economy, as ABN AMRO, the bank, did, it shows up like this. And it's quite interesting because all of a sudden, China comes in 2005. They start their 12 five-year plan, 2011. We get the World Economic Forum, picks it up. The Chinese announced their 13th five-year plan, circular economy. And we have the Ellen MacArthur Foundation forming, the Netherlands going after things. And it's really quite astonishing to see this take off. Now, if we look at the foundational diagrams of circular economy, it starts at the top left with circular economy being cradle-to-cradle concepts, these two metabolisms. And that's what's described in the books. And Ellen MacArthur has, as you can see, adapted it into something with McKinsey that they're using and people can enjoy. And then as we look at what's going on now with the EU, you see on the right, the European Commission, 2016, announced circular economy protocols. One thing I'd like to point out, though, is that that idea of taking the linear economy and turning it into a circle, I think is not quite as robust as we might like to see it. I think we do like this idea of biological, technical nutrient cycles, and that can be brought into this linear loops here, but they really don't want to be commingled all the time. And I think the two loops are probably profoundly useful. The Chinese also asked us to look at how cities could feed themselves and power themselves in the future under these protocols. One of the more astonishing versions of the Chinese movement on this was working with the Icelanders, the Arctic Green Energy Corporation with Sinopec, their oil company. And they looked at the coal-fired plants heating the district heating systems. And they have these giant areas with pipes under the ground heating all the buildings. And they said, well, wait, if we take out the coal-fired plant and put in a geothermal plant, at immensely good economics, by the way, really worth looking at. And then you get these other effects. Isn't that interesting? Look what happens to the air. And so all of a sudden you realize we can have blue skies and warm buildings and not necessarily air pollution. And so that is the awareness and the values translating into value. So immensely cost-effective and profitable business, but look at all the benefits we get: fresh air, clean, cheap energy over time, using existing CapEx investments in the ground. So this strategy and these strategies of circular economy and cradle-to-cradle work at every scale, which is marvelous, and it really starts to show this human intention. So if I ask ourselves, what do we intend to do? Do we intend to damage the air, the soil, and the water? Is that what we set out to do? Is this the plan? Because if that's not the plan, who's got the plan? So in a sense, nature doesn't have a problem with carbon. Humans do. So that means it's a design problem, because design is our signal of our intention. So we need new design. So we have our new intentions, I hope. Now, those design platforms can be cradle to cradle, as we've seen, circular economy, as we've seen, and then circular carbon economy, as we're about to see. Carbon is not the enemy. We are carbon. So when we tell our children, carbon is good or bad, we have to remember we are carbon. What is happening is we're using carbon as a tool for human purposes. Carbon is quite unique because in a circular economy, carbon is both a material and a fuel. That's very important because most of the circular economy work is based on material flows and how we can optimize and reuse things over time. In fact, McKinsey has pointed out the circular economy can be worth trillions and trillions of dollars, and there's all kinds of sectoral analyses on this that we're happy to share with you. So carbon is both a material and a fuel. That's a revelation, really. So think about that. If we use something as a tool, its value is put there by the intention of the user. A child given a hammer will use it as a toy. A carpenter will use it as a tool and build your house. A maniac might be able to use it as a weapon. So it really does matter what the intention of the user is. So as we use carbon we might need a new language of carbon to help us as we think about how we use it. This is working carbon. Okay? So go to the right. This is a new language of carbon that I wrote for Nature journal. And the article was called Carbon is Not the Enemy, November 2016. Living carbon is carbon coming from the atmosphere to soil through photosynthesis, et cetera, and building soil. And this is a carbon positive behavior. It's a good thing. We want more of it. Then we have durable carbon. That's neutral behavior. In other words, we use these plastics over and over again. We put beams in buildings that last for a century. And this is all material being recycled, reused, or just sitting steady like that mountain of calcium carbonate. Then we look at fugitive carbon. This is the carbon that we let escape. And it may be going in places where it can cause damage, like the atmosphere above certain levels if we're concerned about climate effects and that kind of thing, or air pollution. We also have fugitive carbon, which would be that little bottle over on the left is fugitive durable carbon. Whoops. And as you know, if you look around, everybody's getting very concerned about single-use plastics, especially kids, and what's going on in the oceans. So that's fugitive durable carbon. So let's focus on more living carbon. Thank you. You know, President Trump, 1 trillion trees, let's go for it. And then we have durable carbon. Let's go for recycling, reusing, and so on. And then on fugitive carbon, let's stop doing that. And in fact, we may have to go up there and start removing some of it. So that's really, I think, one of the elegant parts of what you're about to see. So living carbon, durable carbon, fugitive carbon. Now, if we take cradle to cradle and then draw it out as a relationship between biological and technical nutrients, we realize you can consume products on the left because they go back to nature. The products on the right are technical materials, products of service. And it's interesting in the flows of carbon that we now are aware of these limits to greenhouse gases that we want to pay attention to for obvious reasons. And we realize that natural systems on the living carbon side automatically balance their carbon cycles. So over the millennia, carbon has been balanced on the nature side because it's natural for it to balance itself. So that's quite important. On the technical side, however, it doesn't, absorb carbon and produce oxygen in the environment. So on the production side, we have to really look carefully at what we want to do about it. So let's develop a balanced carbon economy. And I know this diagram looks a little busy, which is because we're really getting into it now to start to parse it all out and find the elements. But putting them together, you can see up at the top left, this is the balanced carbon cycle of living carbon. And so the materials are carbohydrate based, that's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And I rotate through these systems with waste equals food. And if we want to use this as a sequestering event and for help, over on the left, you see remove. There's your trillion trees. That would restore soils and so on. And then on the right, you see we can remove carbon from the atmosphere with carbon capture technique directly. But the important thing in watching the energy flow here is it's coming up from the bottom in this diagram, moving through the production and transportation energy, driving the gears of these two economies together. So without the energy, we don't have economies circulating. We might have a circle, but it's not moving. So this is a really important point. If we go to the carbon story of this, we can start below the ground there, the center, and say hydrocarbon sources. I save the word resources for things we're using again, resources. So let's just say hydrocarbon assets and sources. I hesitate to call them fossil fuels because if design is intention, then we intend to burn them. Maybe we don't. Maybe we use them for carbon materials for our polymers and various things like that. And as we use this energy and the other non-carbon sources that are coming, we can move it through the system and we can reduce, reuse, recycle it. And we can start to do point source carbon capture. We can do reductions, and there's concern about emissions reductions by 2050 in Europe. All those things can be integrated here. And that's important. Now, if you go zooming in on this energy piece, this is CAPSARC has prepared this diagram, which you've seen already, which is really the energy flows, circular carbon energy flows that are moving through the system in relative volumes and direction and utility. So we'll be integrating all this information into a coherent program. I just thought I'd pick one last thing. Material recovery. This is steel. Circular materials, steel is 95% recycled by some metrics. And if you look at it, it's reduce, reuse, recycle, which is a famous triad of environmental behavior with materials. 7% of the global carbon emissions come from steel. So we look to the right, a company called Lancetech working with ArcelorMittal, they're building a facility now, takes the carbon monoxide out of a steel plant, can turn it to ethanol, and let's just follow it go into plastics, for example. It can go and be reused again, this carbon. So the diagram in a simplistic way would be coal, gets burned, makes steel. Now, if we could take that effluent, the emission, and turn it into ethanol, make durable carbon with it, use it as a plastic out there in the world, then we can bring it back. If we can't recycle a plastic, form factors or quantities and things in the wrong place, we can also have it replace the coal. So all of a sudden, you watch that blue line, what you're watching is carbon being circulated, recirculated. And actually, this will move toward hydrogen. And we're seeing now that hydrogen will be made from renewable power quite effectively very soon. So to finish, enabling the circular economy means we want to reduce so we don't waste. We want to reuse so we get extra utility and cycles over centuries. And we want to recycle, which is take the things back to their core elements and do it again without throwing it away, so to speak. Because where is away? Away has gone away. We used to have things we could throw away, but now it's the ocean and the atmosphere, and that's not away anymore. So we're adding the word remove, which is not in the normal circular economy. We want to keep redo in the circular economy. But here we add remove because we need to do that to get this balanced carbon effect. So this is the circular carbon economy. And as we go forward, for the economists here too, we can start to think in systematic ways. Let's take an inventory of what we're doing. Let's say we don't want to produce more carbon emitting energy unless it's carbon neutral energy, which is that carbon capture and so on. And so renewables, carbon capture, utilization, storage. So let's start developing our economic models. It's interesting that Thomas Jefferson, when forming the government with James Madison in the United States, decided a federal bond should be one generation. And he wrote this to Madison: "The earth belongs to the living. No man may by natural right oblige the lands he owns or occupies to debts greater than those that may be paid during his own lifetime, because if he could, the world would belong to the dead and not to the living." So if we're going to look at how to have a civilization in balance with nature, which is who we are, and we're going to want to look at how to have aspirations as they do here with these, and I work with many companies in place, this is what we're all trying to do together while we're profitable, of course. And we realize that we're all in this together and that will take us forever, but that is the point. Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much for that. You're going to unshare your screen, and there we go. What I'd like to do now is share my screen with you, and we will talk about what CAPSARC has been doing on the circular carbon economy. So see if I can make this happen. And let me just start off by framing this discussion as one associated with thinking about how we can deal with climate change mitigation efforts in a more practical and sustainable way. So far, these efforts have largely focused on faster deployment of renewables and then replacing hydrocarbons, particularly in power and the transportation sectors. Despite a heroic effort that has actually been quite successful across many sectors and countries, global emissions have still grown, and greenhouse gas concentrations are still very high. In fact, in 2018 hit record levels. They plateaued in 2019. They may actually go down in 2020, but because of the lack of economic activity associated with the coronavirus. This is not the way we want to succeed with climate mitigation. Mitigation strategies really should look at practical and effective solutions that nurture a holistic approach take advantage of all of the opportunities that we have for solving these problems. And Bill has very eloquently outlined how we might do that, certainly from the standpoint of the circular economy. What I'd like to show you is how the circular economy that Bill talked about might mesh with the circular carbon economy. The idea here would be to try to implicitly value all of the options and encourage many and broad efforts to mitigate carbon accumulation in the atmosphere. So the circular economy that Bill talked about is a systems approach to sustainable production and consumption. It really talks about resource and material flows, and concentrating on those assets and how we can utilize those assets in the economy. And the goal is to minimize resource consumption and final waste disposal. The circular economy builds on this by adding remove to the 3 R's of the circular economy, and we'll get into that. But we look at a systems approach to climate mitigation. Again, as I said, that values all options. It concentrates on energy and carbon flows, and is a framework for managing greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon dioxide, towards a balance. Bill showed you this graphic, but let me just try to explain again. We're looking at options like reduce, and including efficiency, which has been a favorite and very positive way of addressing greenhouse gas emissions. But it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Reuse and recycle, Bill had some of those options on his discussion, particularly about what you might do with carbon dioxide in a chemical facility to make ethanol or to make fertilizer, for example. I think we have to add remove and carbon storage to this list of things, because right now carbon storage is probably the most effective in terms of its scale to deal with this issue. But even that is not sufficient. Again, we have to try all of these options. The guide, so CAPSARC is working on producing a guide to the circular carbon economy so that we can help with the understanding of these issues. As I mentioned before, it has 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. These boxes actually can move around and maybe appear more than once in each of these classifications. So don't think of this as something that's completely sacrosanct. But reduce, clearly energy efficiency, renewables, even nuclear power. Nuclear would allow for lower carbon by reducing the generation of emissions. Reuse, things like carbon utilization and emissions to value. Recycle, bioenergy, and remove, carbon capture and storage, by the way, including natural sinks. Hydrogen stands by itself down here because we see this as a cross-cutting kind of approach that could really, in many ways, fall under a number of these classifications. So let me just go through this, again. What would this guide that CAPSARC is trying to produce include? Well, it would be an overview of what the circular carbon economy is all about. We would have a discussion of energy efficiency and the role that energy efficiency can play, along with renewables and nuclear, carbon utilization, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, and very, very importantly, enabling policies and multiple policy pathways to make all of this happen. We are getting some help in this from some very strong organizations in the international community, including the International Energy Agency, which will be working on energy efficiency, carbon utilization, and hydrogen. The Nuclear Energy Agency will outline the role that nuclear can play in bringing carbon into balance. The International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi that will write on non-biomass renewables as well as bioenergy. The Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute in Australia that will help us shape the conversation on carbon capture and storage, as well as direct air capture. And the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which will be doing a chapter on enabling policies. What are the policies that are needed to make this concept move forward? Again, we'll be concentrating on reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. And we hope to have this guide done in time for it to be used by the economic ministers and finance ministers who will be attending the G20 meeting later this year. Now with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce Khalid Al-Balif. Khalid has over 30 years experience dealing with sustainability, climate change policy, and carbon management. He's currently a senior advisor to the Saudi Minister of Energy, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman. Khalid also serves as the chief negotiator for climate agreements for Saudi Arabia. Let me just add that he's a proud graduate holding 3 degrees from the University of Houston in Texas. So I'm delighted, Khalid, to see your slides up here on the screen, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Adam, and I'm so glad that I come right after 2 scholars that have made so much in integrating circular carbon economy concept and approach in Saudi Arabia. My objective here is to just tell you why did Saudi Arabia chose to follow this approach and concept and to apply it at the national level. 3 very attractive things that comes with this approach, and thanks to Bill and Adam and Kapsar work on this regard. The first element here that really made a difference is that it chooses all the options. So for a country that has great endowments in hydrocarbons, as well as have great endowments in solar and wind, you really want to make sure that you don't limit your options, and you want to make sure that you can contribute to efforts, development efforts, as well as international efforts in a meaningful way. Also, the focus here is emission, and not only emission, but as Bill has said, fugitive emission, and where we can really find ways and means to see what can we do with how can we deal with these emissions in a very responsible manner. And then finally, the competence that the kingdom has gained over the past half a century with regards of dealing with oil and gas as well as petrochemical sectors has really given it so much competence on how to take these fugitive emissions and manage them into useful products, as we have done in flaring and of the associated gas. So we really did have a great reasons for us to move into this concept and development. I don't want to dwell much here, but we all know that circular carbon economy since the 70s is 3 components, as Bill and Adam has said, and we really and that was not enough for us to deal with an issue like greenhouse gases, because we know that that is complex as well as for us to reach a balance between emission and sinks, we really need to be very creative in developing this concept. And then we moved into circular carbon economy, where we already recognize that without the remove component, it will be extremely difficult for us to reach those goals in balancing emission at the end of the day. And as a matter of fact, this is a very important point, because as we go through this presentation, we will find out that without remove, it would be impossible for the kingdom, and I think any other country, to manage their balance as they have declared. So that component is extremely important, recognizing the realities that we live in it today. Now, understanding that, let me just take you one step further and look at the total emissions that we do emit in general. We all know that the world and the globe, almost, as IAEA said, emits almost 33 gigatons of carbon per year, and we're talking here about carbon equivalents. And we recognize also that the energy component, I'm sorry for the presentation, but somehow the words are out. The energy component here take the share of 41%. And here we're talking on power generation as well as heating and cooling. And these are very much tied down with one very important conceptual approach, and that is technology. And as we do have so far, the world do have all the possible technologies that could really bring this sector under full control. Now, looking beyond those technologies, basically in other sectors beyond energy, we find out that 59% of the emissions come from sectors that really heavily relies on services and products. Like 95% of these sectors are mobility. You have industry and food and agriculture, as well as other smaller like building, waste, and others. But as you can see that without also finding ways and means to address those fugitive emissions coming from all these sectors, it will be almost impossible that we can meet a balance, as we have discussed in the climate discussion in the second half of the century. So we really need to have an overlook on all of those sectors together for us to really determine if we are really moving in the right path and the right direction. Recognizing that, on the energy sector, we, as we said, we do have great technologies that could help us move this sector forward. And here I'm talking about power generation and heating in general. We have cleaner energy system that exists, renewables, energy efficiency, nuclear, CCUS, bioenergy, direct air capture, which is, some of them are still in the very early stages, but are available for us to develop as we move in making a difference in this sector. And as Adam said, on the reduced side, we can recognize clearly that we have renewable, energy efficiency, and nuclear. These technologies will make sure that we will be reducing any fugitive emission that would go to the system. But I mean, no matter what you do here, you would always need to deal with some portions of the emissions that goes to the system. Now, the trick here is, as Bill said, how can we take these emissions and change them into durable carbon and into living carbon, and find ways and means to circulate them into the system so that we do not leave them go to the atmosphere, and try to find ways and means to make useful use of them. And for a country like Saudi Arabia, has created 2 cities like Jubail and Yanbu from associated gas, and we build a whole petrochemical system from that. So the competence there, and it exists. Recognizing that, but even with that, without remove, it would be almost impossible for us to reach those goals that we have. So in the energy sector, no matter what we do, we know that at the end of the day, we'd have to resort to remove if we are utilizing anything beyond renewable energy. Now, moving from there into the other 3 sectors. The other 3 sectors, they are sectors that heavily rely on products and material and services. And the only way you can really tackle this question is you go down to the lowest level of activities, looking at the product itself and seeing ways and means how you could apply these issues to them, circular economy to them. And so we looked at this model from this aspect. On the reduce side, we should heavily look into the demand that we are utilizing for these products and services. We need to look at the resources, as Bill said. Are they cradle to cradle, or are we bringing linear resources from areas that we are exploring and making them, getting them from a linear process? Also, the efficiency within that system, how far can we go? So in the reduce side, you can always do so much in the industry and mobility, as well as the food sector in approaching and addressing these questions. Also, you have greater opportunity even within the system itself. You look at possibilities of taking certain gases and recycle them into the system, or taking them and using, selling them as feedstock or products to other industries around. Now, in a product, if you took all these measures and you still does not meet your goals, no doubt that these products can only be neutral if you have to buy certificates that would remove a remove certificate that would really give you the ability to make sure that you are addressing this question and making sure that you are making a difference in these other sectors beyond the energy sector. So with that, I think we need to look at the total outlook of the emissions. From our analysis in this, we noticed that no matter what we do in the food sector, we do not see that sector will be circulating without serious implementation of remove action. Similarly, in the industry, because 50% of the emissions come from the processes themselves, not from the energy that they receive from these processes, which means that we really need to find ways and means to add remove to it to address these questions. If we look at the mobility, I think even mobility would know how much technology in the reduce side and recognizing the distribution of wealth in the world and the continents, you will always see that these system will be will not have an balance. It will have a balance that you need to deal with at the end of the day. So with that, we think circular carbon economy is a very logical concept, and for us, it's attractive because it takes all the elements. It takes the hydrocarbon as well as the renewable as well as the hydrocarbon at the same side, and then have a platform to deal with all of them that targets the emission and make sure that you're reaching the balance that you need at the end of the day. With that, I thank you, and I return back to you, Adam.
Okay, thank you, Khalid. Up at the top, you can unshare the screen. Perfect. We have about 15 minutes left for questions. And Dave and Rebecca, if we, since I know you could probably grant us another few minutes to answer a number of the questions that have come up. We'll go through as many of these as we can. I've answered a few by typing in an answer. Generally speaking, there were a lot of people that are wondering where the slides are going to be available. And as Dave mentioned at the top of this program, we are recording, and this will be available on the International Association for Energy Economics website. One of the questions is, what are the barriers for Cradle to Cradle to become mainstream in residences and offices? Bill, could you take that one? You've got to unmute, Bill.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. I think that the barriers for Cradle to Cradle are the obvious ones, which are inertia, economic constraints to adding new thought to things. I think what we'll find as it comes out now, it's starting to come very vigorously into the marketplace, is that companies that have taken it up have been able to show immense value. And so I think the economics, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the conversation here, is that we know this will be driven by economics. And so just to take the one example of Warren Buffett and Shaw Industries. Shaw Industries is now 84% of its revenue, and it's a multi-billion-dollar company, largest car company in the world, among other things, is from Cradle to Cradle products. And they've found that the customers, knowing that the materials have been carefully screened, that the energy is as good as it can be on a trajectory for clean energy, etc., is valuable, and they enjoy it in both residential and office buildings. So you can now get these materials, and that's the key, is that they should be more available, easy to get. And also I want to see the cost of the Cradle to Cradle certification go way down. And I think with the tools of AI and machine learning, we look at databases of tens of thousands of chemicals that have to be assessed in relation to each other in product development. So it's a dense and very serious piece of work. And I think that could get automated and start bring it down into just normal behavior, like a quality, just normal high quality behavior. So that's the barrier, I think, is scale.
Thank you, Bill. There was also a question about where that Nature article might be referenced, and I'm sure we could get that link to be posted as well. Khalid, there's a question for you about the potential for the circular carbon economy in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Is it realistic? And is Saudi Arabia going to be able to meet the CO2 emissions targets that were agreed to in Paris? Over to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, I think it's serious. And as you know, Adam, Saudi Arabia is experimenting with two major zones of the kingdom. We have NEO, who's targeting reaching the neutrality in their region. And they are building their plans on that basis. Another area in the kingdom that is also doing the same is the Red Sea project. And both of them, as a matter of fact, are going to be the starting seed for understanding how you can deal with that system and deal with its accounting in a very credible manner, and then look how you could do it throughout the kingdom. We all know, Adam, that Saudi Arabia has transferred almost 2.8 billion tons of carbon from associated gas into products that contributes almost 43% of the GDP for the kingdom, which is something that is not known much, but that is something that is part of the competence of this country.
Yeah, thank you, Khalid. Let me also point out that on the CAPSARC website, and all of the research that CAPSARC does is freely available on capsarc.org website. And there are a number of studies there about the potential for reducing carbon in the Saudi economy, including things like substituting natural gas for oil and power generation and other approaches. There is also a very interesting tool that's available through the CAPSARC website. That's a tool that we worked with another organization that allows anybody to look at various policies for the kingdom, things like industrial policies and regulations, things like efficiency rules, and many other policy options that can be picked. There's a slider that allows you to choose levels to see what the effect would be on the emissions in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So have a look at that. There are a number of questions about specific numbers for the circular carbon economy and applications in Saudi Arabia and other places. And I think you might want to look at that tool that's on the website. And one question back to Bill. Bill, how does the idea of transforming fugitive carbon from hydrocarbon emissions into durable carbon and living carbon, could you just kind of go through that again shortly for people and explain the difference between living carbon, fugitive carbon, and others?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. If we look at that chimney in the middle of the diagram we're working with there, and you start to imagine that we can capture emissions in the circumstances where we are having carbon emissions, like we've seen in steel, or like we've seen in any chemical manufacturing or energy plants, that as we can capture carbon locally at places it's concentrated, point source, and we can get the carbon dioxide back and turn it into various chemicals that can be feedstocks for synthetic chemistries, for example. So if we can get back to ethanol and we can get back to polymers, then it's moving it toward durable carbon. And so it becomes carbon as a material instead of carbon as a fuel. So we take the thing that was carbon in a fuel and turn it back to being carbon as a material. That's one. That could go to durable carbon if it's polymers that are being recycled or are durable just in terms of their use. The other is that I think quite interesting is once you see that carbon as an asset and say we don't want it in the atmosphere, it's a liability, so we want to use it for something else. I also see over time that these things can be put into the compostable plastics as well. And then we move it all of a sudden into agricultural mulch films, things like that, but only, and compostable packaging too, which I think will be coming at some point, and very critical given all the various issues, but that it can be actually used to heal soil, as long as it can go back to hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So we're looking at things that go right back to all the way down to soil without getting conflicted with the microplastics and nanoplastics and other things, really truly compostable polymers. So I think in the long term, I call it oil to soil as a mental model, because we can always use better soil. That's part of the whole story here. And we can also make more things with it. So we already have it. So you need concentration of flow to make anything economic. So if we can concentrate these emissions into a useful asset and then move it through the living and durable system rather than letting it go fugitive again, that's sort of the diagram.
So there we go. Durable carbon, living carbon, and fugitive. And we want less of the fugitive and we want more of the living and durable. There's one question that says, is the circular carbon economy, has that been tried anywhere else? Or is this just going to be in Saudi Arabia? And let me just try to briefly answer that. This is not exactly a new idea in the sense that what we're saying is that it's it's building out on the circular economy concept, but saying that remove is going to be a critical component of that. This is really kind of a framework for thinking about it. And if you go back to the slide that we were showing, we think that this framework will be a very effective way to show where the bottlenecks are in the system. So what are the kinds of things that have to be expanded in order to make this approach realistic? What level of carbon storage, both biostorage and geologic storage, for example, would be necessary depending on the levels of things like renewables, including energy storage as part of renewables, and how much other options that you are able to implement. So it's a way to, I think, help policymakers envision the kinds of things that are going to be necessary. Khalid, for you, an interesting one is, what role would carbon trading play in a circular carbon economy, either in Saudi Arabia or across the rest of the world? The role of carbon trading.
No doubt, Adam and whoever has asked, that for such a system to succeed and move forward, you really need to have incentives in the system that would help this circulation of fugitive emission into durable emission, living emission, as well as, when that is not possible, storing it. And of course, you have all the possibilities. We have, in Saudi Arabia, we look at the value of carbon much more closely because it's much more practical, and it depends on the supply and demand that we'll create out of the system based on the incentives we have. And that's what we really think would be the most appropriate way to advance these efforts. However, this doesn't say that trading could be a medium-term or long-term possibility for these efforts, if the systems at the international level is well established and well done in a manner that will regain the confidence on it. So far, international trading in general has not been gaining that confidence, as we all know, with the CDM and the other systems that we had before that. And I think hopefully with Article 6 and the Paris Agreement, we will create a system that would be solid enough to regain the confidence on those systems.
One of the other questions was, when will carbon capture and storage CCS technologies be widely utilized and economically viable? We will be, the guide that CAPSARC is working on will be covering that through the work of the Global CCS Institute, as well as the policy pathways view that will be coming from the OECD. There are financially viable, economically viable carbon capture projects that are already underway, a number of them in the United States, spurred along by a tax credit that's available in the United States to help encourage this. This is one of the things that the organizations that we're working with will probably highlight in their reports that will be published. What kinds of incentives are going to be required to take this from a theoretical framework into actual implementation? And there'll be more said on that as we work our way through the report. Is there evidence that CO2 capture is or can be a cheaper way to mitigate climate change than production of renewables, clean transport, energy storage, green hydrogen, and so on? I'd like to try that one very quickly, but then maybe give both Bill and Holland an opportunity to mention that too. In my view, one of the nice things about the concept or the framework of the circular carbon economy is that it says that all of these options have to be on the table. You know, any individual portion of this is probably not going to be sufficient to deal with the problem, and it will require a very large effort, I think, to launch many of these initiatives and get a lot of different methodologies and projects underway to deal with the problem. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing so far in the fact that emissions have continued to rise. Bill, do you want to make a comment on that? Unmute, Bill.
I just want to reinforce your point that we're going to have to sort of have a clean slate, look at all things, and move to places where we can do things effectively and efficiently, both. And so, for example, when we say, let's plant 1 trillion trees, as we heard in Davos, that is a stimulus to ask the question, where, when, how, and how do we pay for it, and so on. And then it has to all be optimized. And so the great part of the question is, let's go optimize that and see what it looks like. And you know, if we want to do carbon capture, we might find out that that's one of the most cost-effective ways to do it, and that has all these other benefits where we need the economists to get to work too with us, so they can say, here's what it does for biodiversity, here's what it does for water quality, here's what it does for communities, and start to put all the associated values with each act. So we end up with our balance sheets and our assessments being quite richly informed. And as another one of the questions pointed out, this is about sharing the planet with each other. So the whole issue of how do we share with each other is really critical. There's a social dimension for this that we've seen that really needs to be carefully engaged, because if the cost of going renewable increases the prices of energy to the people who can't afford energy, then we have to help them get the energy they need at the same time we're going with the renewables, which I'm sure we can do because we are a clever species. It did take us 5,000 years to put wheels on our luggage, and we did go to the moon before we put wheels on our luggage, but we now have wheels on our luggage, and so we will figure this out. But all together now, you know, is really what we need. And I think these technologies are all going to merge into a symphony, and hopefully the music will be delightful to hear.
Do more of what's working and less of what isn't. Khalid, for you, do you see any specific initiatives that could be taken in the kingdom that would move the circular carbon economy forward?
As a matter of fact here, Adam, let me just answer the first question and come back to this one.
Sure.
The beauty about circular carbon economy, just building on what Bill said, is that it is technology agnostic. It is very neutral. It really looks at all types of technologies and advances those technologies that are cost effective and could move us forward. And I think this is where we really want to bank on as we move forward. And then also it gives us a greater opportunity in calibrating how ambitious are we and how far we can go into circularity and the degree of that circularity. And the more ambitious you are, there is no doubt that you come to a point where you really cannot do it without bringing in carbon capture and storage, because we all know, IPCC said very clearly that there is no way we can reach the 2 degrees or 1.5 degree without negative emissions and without taking some of the emissions that we already have in this atmosphere. So it's very obvious. It's demand and supply and ambitious that you need to put on the system that would bring you to the value of those technologies and how far you can go with them.
Thank you, Khalid. I think that that Dave and Rebecca have graciously let us run over. I think in 5 minutes we should probably stop. Let me just add that to try to make this program real, CAPSARC and other organizations and institutions in the kingdom will try to look at this and think of ways that business models and incentives could be implied, what kind of infrastructure might be necessary, what role technology and innovation might play, and how regulatory and legal systems might be set up. In my view, the kingdom is very serious about this program because virtually everybody that I talk to here in the kingdom sees this as a critical path forward in meeting those goals that Khalid just talked about and implementing the Paris Agreement. There were a number of questions about the role that the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic might have in this role. You know, I think it's probably early days to be able to say that. And I'm looking, and we still have 90 more questions, which I don't think we're going to get to. But perhaps I know that there is a way to capture the questions after the webinar is completed, and Dave can do that. And perhaps the terrific environmental and climate program staff here at CAPSARC would be able to take these questions, group them, and then try to see whether between myself and Bill and Khalid and others that we might be able to draw on here in the kingdom, whether we could answer these or not. And we'll be delighted to do that. And then maybe we could post those questions and answers on the IAEE website. Maybe in the last few minutes that we have, Khalid, I'll give you and Bill an opportunity to do a wrap up. Khalid, what would you like to say, do you think is the path forward here in this as we look out into the rest of 2020 and all the way out to the kingdom's goals and vision for the year 2030? Khalid, over to you.
Thank you, Adam, and we're very excited, as a matter of fact, about the announcement of His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz to make this a reality and apply a circular carbon economy in the kingdom. We are working right now on a framework that would put this together and package it in a way that would really accomplish the ambitions that we have in this regard. And I'm very proud that I am part of that team, and you, as a matter of fact, Adam and Bill. And we hope with all the other team members and all the significant contributors to this effort, we can come up with a solid program that would really move our ambition forward in this. Back to you.
Thank you, Khalid. Bill?
When physicist Murray Gell-Mann won the Nobel Prize for discovering the quark, he got up on stage at Stanford University and he said, you know, we've discovered something astonishing in theoretical physics, that the more and more beautiful a mathematical formula begins to appear, the more and more likely it is true. And what I found with this project is the more and more we all work on it, the more and more beautiful it becomes when we start to see the whole system. Without knowing every little bit of it, we just know it's all there. And it is a really exquisite vision, and it's going to be very hard to do. It's going to take all of us to get it done. And so for the tools the economists can bring to this are immensely critical. So all I'll say is a privilege to be involved, and I only can say thank you to all the participants and to Dave and his staff and Adam and Khalid for just everyone's time today. to join us, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. You know, I just heard from Eric Williams. Eric is one of the staff members here at CAPSARC who authored one of the early papers and coined the phrase actually on circular carbon economy. Eric's paper is available on the CAPSARC website, and we've already talked with Dave Williams at the IAEE about the possibility in another month or two of having Eric and possibly a few of our partners from the international organizations come on and talk about the progress that they are making on the report series that we will publish, this guide to the circular carbon economy. So Dave, we'll see if we can beat the statistics, today's very strong numbers. I'd like to thank everybody. Many of the questions that came in were really in the form of a compliment that this was a terrific set of presentations, fitting together well, very helpful. And I would like to thank everybody who offered those kind words of encouragement to us in this effort. Dave, with that, if you're still there and want to unmute, and I'll turn this back to you, and we'll say thank you for the support of the International Association for Energy Economics in making this webinar possible. Dave?
Thank you, Adam, and really thank you to Adam, Bill, and Khalid for such an outstanding presentation today on circular carbon economy. Also wish to thank all of our participants. You've beaten the record so far for the number of folks on our webinar series. I quite like the idea of working with Eric in the future on the report series. So Eric, if you're listening, will be coming your way in due course. For everyone listening, there will be a webinar rewind. We will send an email out to all of our members, and you can circulate this to your friends and colleagues as well to be able to listen to the webinar on our website. This concludes this webinar today. I do encourage you all to keep posted to www.iaee.org. This is our website, and I wish you all a safe and happy day. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you, Dave.